Hi guys, welcome back. This week we're really lucky to have Lalya Gaye, who is an interaction designer, artist, and generally amazing human being. And she's going to talk a bit about her work. And we've been working on designing experiences for people. We're doing it in quite a kind of contained way using these posters. And I think Lally's going to have quite a lot to say in terms of working with people and the kind of projects she creates. So I'm going to pass over to you.
Hi everyone. So as Kira was saying, my name is Lalya Gaye and I'm interaction designer, digital media artist. And currently I work actually at the European Broadcasting Union of Eurovision fame. But I've long worked as a designer, freelancer in different research institutes and collectives. And I'm going to show you a few projects I worked on through the years to show you a bit about the kind of things I do and also what my process is, how I design for experiences for audiences and users. So this is one of my first projects called Sonic City, which we did a long time ago in 2000 to 2004. It was a collaborative project with my colleagues Ramya Mazé, Daniel Skoglund and Margaret Jacobs. And I was working in a research institute. So we were sort of trying to find new ways of doing things and just thinking about like the future of technology and interactivity. So in this project, we're looking at new ways of doing musical interfaces, and we thought, why not turn the city, the urban environment into a musical interface? So in this project, you wear a garment with sensors that sort of check what your interaction is in the urban space in real time. And when you walk in the streets, everything you're doing, the way you're interacting with the urban space becomes music in real time using urban sounds that are filtered and processed in real time. So if you change a street or kind of ambience, then the structure of the music changes. If you go next to a letterbox or to a person or walk under a shadow, then you have sort of little musical events going on. So you kind of play it like a musical instrument. And so the idea with it was to create an experience where people get to rediscover their everyday environment in a new way and get to be creative with it, with the ordinary sort of objects and people and spaces that you see every day, but then you can see them in a bit of a different way and then do something creative with it.
And can I just ask you there? So, because you said, they can be also creative, but actually what's really wonderful about your work is that the creativity is the thing that allows them to discover the city in a new way. Is that true? Would you say that's true, I suppose?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. If you create a different way of engaging with something or someone, then you see it in a different way. So the people, we did user studies where you had people wearing that garment with sensors on their bodies, like metal detectors, light sensors and such. And they all reported that they kind of saw things in a different way. And they also try to, the funny thing is that they were playing the city in a sense, but they were also trying to act normal. So they would do things like suddenly turn towards a shop window because they wanted to have like more bass sounds. And they would be like, "Oh yeah, a really interesting shop,"
And that's really
just pretending to be doing something normal, but actually they were playing the space.
the key word there's normal is something we've been exploring a bit. It's like, well, it exposes what is normal to an extent, doesn't it? It's like, why isn't it maybe to be able to go like that?
Yeah.
But yeah, so brilliant.
Yeah, so none of them actually did anything that would be like, jumping, or it was all just really like kind of normal, ordinary gestures, but all in the with the purpose of doing something, of creating that music. And we also designed the thing that way, that they didn't have to do anything outrageous. It was all based on regular, ordinary spaces, gestures. So seeing the everyday life as a resource for creativity.
Why not make them, have to do giant star jumps or do something really weird, run into traffic? Why not? Why not do that? Why go with everyday gestures? What was that?
Because that was what we were interested in, to see like what was the creative potential of ordinary everyday spaces. But I've done other projects where we did encourage people to be like wild and do things, but not in that particular one.
And it's great. It's a choice, though. Again, I think this is what's useful for our students, is seeing those choices you make and how that then affects what you design, because that's kind of where
Exactly.
at the moment. So
Yeah.
I'll stop.
So the type of sensors you choose, where you place them, how you process that data, how you map it to the results, to the output, that determines the kind of interaction that you're encouraging people to have. and then they'll do something of their own that you haven't really predicted, but it's always like you design for something and then you see what happens. So here's another project I did a while ago when I was still working at that research institute in Sweden. And it was in 2002, 2004, right at the beginning of the whole movement of locative media, which meant having digital media in urban space. And so basically these were like little audio graffiti boxes that we would put in urban space where people would record a message, and then you would hear that message by having to lean towards that box and sort of do that kind of gesture. So like the kind of like, intimate secret sharing kind of gesture. So the messages would be whispered into your ear. So the idea was that the urban space, or like that people would leave messages everywhere in space and you would hear it as a whisper.
And again, here, I just want to point out, so there's a really clear design decision in making the interaction, not just, it could have just been a button that you pressed or you went near the trigger, right? It's very much, you physically have to do this, which changes the way that person will engage with that experience and kind of the outcome you have. So just important for our students that.
Yeah, so the goal of that project was, since it was an interaction design project, a research project, we wanted to see what kind of alternative ways of interacting you could have with digital media that wouldn't be just like, staring at a screen of a mobile phone or clicking on things, but can you use like more poetic kind of gestures, things that are more, that suggests a certain type of relationship between the person who leaves the message and yourself. So in that case, we did one where the relationship is more sort of intimate because of that gesture. And also there's a bit of a shout out to the street art culture of the time in the early 2000s that was very much about having sort of 3D contextual type of pieces into urban space that blend with the background, but also have volume and take place. So that was a bit the intention with this. And we also had within that project other things where we were using more like sort of parasitic type of ways of implanting yourself in urban space, but I won't go into that.
And just really briefly again, one of the things they're doing at the moment is they have to explore the context of where they're doing it, the people that they're going to be working with, and the kind of the inspiration, the kind of themes around that. So hearing you say that, it's this kind of multi-layered process, isn't it? I mean, they're technology on top of things as well, where they may use it to a small extent, but it's that kind of complete network
view of space on a large scale, the people who are in it, the relationships, the cultural meanings. You have to sort of play with all those aspects. That's what makes interaction design interesting, actually, because it's not just about visual or just about sound or just about technology. It's everything. It's the way things smell, the way they feel when you touch them. So all these aspects. So here's another sort of urban space kind of project. So this is not a project where I'm the main artist. I'm just one of the artists helping out. So this piece is mainly one of Gaye Mainstone, who's based in London. It's called Wanderlooper. And it was basically the inauguration of a bridge in Sunderland in the northeast of England. And there was sort of those kaleidoscope kind of looking, actually, when you go on a mountain or on top of a tower and you have those things that you put a coin into and then you can...
Oh, like telescope?
Then,
then
you can see the view. I forgot what they're called.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Binoculars?
Not binoculars. They're on a pedestal and you have to move them using very wide movements and then you can see like the entire city from the top of that mountain.
Oh, you mean camera obscura? The ones that go...
like they really are like a touristic kind of thing.
Telescope, I think.
I forgot what they're called. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen them if you've been on top of a building, like a very tall skyscraper or something. So her idea was to do something like that, but instead of having views of Sunderland that you could see from the bridge, you would actually experience stories, narratives about the city using sounds. So you would look through this sort of, I forgot what they're called. And you could look at the landscape that would be sort of blood into a kaleidoscope kind of fragment of the landscape. But you would also hear stories that the artist had recorded with local inhabitants of Sunderland. And compositions that another sound artist had done. And when you're panning through the space, you actually go from one story to another, or you hear a story that comes from that particular direction from town. And so that was what the Wonder Looper was doing. Actually, there was two types of them. One of them was doing that, and the other one was recording sounds that people were making when they were using it and then remixing it. So my role in that project was to help with the sound and the electronics and the interaction of it. So there was a lot of soldering, coding, these kind of things. A lot of late nights figuring out where the electricity had disappeared because all of a sudden something was connecting to something and then all the current in the other way. So yeah, it's one of the difficulties of doing, bespoke kind of installations that are not just with off-the-shelf things, but you actually built everything from scratch. We also worked with the Fab Lab in Sunderland, so everything was really like built there.
I just wanted to point out with the two different projects, right? You've got one where you're setting the person to go and discover sounds within the city by embodying it.
Yeah.
Here, you're drawing the sounds from the city or the stories or the things that, in the community into a single place, right? And an interaction, on the face of it, it's like, well, you can remix and hear different bits of the city, right? Two very different projects. Very different.
Yeah. Again, this is Diamond Stone's main project, so I'm just one of the helpers. But I thought what was interesting with it is that, well, I like the idea of celebrating the local population and the local stories and people, and to do a poetic interpretation of the space. But my personal challenge working on this was how to sort of compete with the existing landscape, because this is on a bridge. It was a very windy day when it was like a one-day event, so it wasn't a permanent exhibition. But it was a very windy day. There was traffic. So how do you build something where you have the existing soundscape and then you build something on top of that? That is something that's easy when you have like headphones or if you like leaning really close to the speaker. But in this case, I mean, people kind of put their head inside of this thing, but you still have the whole surrounding environment. So this is a bit of an engineering and a design kind of challenge. And also the fact that it's a public space installation, as every other public space installation, it needs to be really sturdy. People shouldn't be able to break it really easily. So there was like all those little details that we had to look into in order to make it something that was usable. And this is a piece that I did with an artist called Joël Biton back in Newcastle in Northeast England, so next in Sunderland. It was in an old cinema called Tyneside Cinema that had an artist residency program. And basically this cinema is a really old building from like turn of the 19th century. And in the building, they have like this turning spiral staircase. And this is where the installation took place. So what we wanted was to celebrate a bit the history of the cinema and also use public domain movies because of the fact that it's a public space, and we wanted to also use something that we can easily play with. So if it's not copyrighted, then it's really good. And what happened is that
just the themes, it was really interesting there. They have to decide on themes they want to explore in some of their work. It's kind of a hard thing to get sometimes, but if you research, there's something about it being a public space. There's something about the history of the building and the continued use of the building as well. Sorry, it's just really helpful to point those small things out for our students. So.
Yeah. Okay. So the interaction that we designed here was a bit like, the Michael Jackson Billie Jean video, where he steps on different streets, squares, and then they light up. So similarly, when you stepped on some of the steps, sorry, my English is getting terrible. So some of the steps would light up, and when they would light up, you would get a randomly selected extracts of a movie that we had dissected into little bits of samples. So we selected 3 movies for this. One was Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is like the most bizarre sci-fi movie ever made. It's actually got a prize for the worst movie ever made, but it's not that bad. It has like some of the dialogues are really gems. Like we are all interested in the future because this is where we'll be spending the rest of our lives. So these kind of things. And then we also used the movie Freaks, Some of you might know this one, the one of us.
Right,
Another one that was like a slapstick comedy called His Girl Friday, which was a big classic back in the days. And the fact that we cut those dialogues into small slices meant that when people walked up and down the stairs and triggered those bits of dialogues from different movies randomly, this created really random kind of dialogues where someone from Plan 9 out of space would say something, and then someone from Freak will respond something else, and every time it will be a different kind of really weird conversation going on between those movies and between the people walking up and down the stairs.
And so they play the stairs almost, right?
Yeah, actually that's what happened, because well, these are obviously like sort of functional stairs that people use to go up and down to the different cinemas, the different theaters in the building. So it was a really high traffic environment, which we also took into consideration. But the funny thing is that it's also, this building is a sort of a meeting place for a lot of the older ladies in the city. They will meet in the cafe that's on the 3rd floor, I think. It's very nice, like Art Deco cafe. And this installation became really popular with them, because they would go there and notice that something was happening, and then they would start playing with it, going up and down the stairs, and like really sort of enjoying and jumping. And so this is what I was referring to earlier when we talked about Sonic City, which was based on designing around ordinary environments and gestures. This one was more sort of encouraging playful kind of behaviors, because of the fact that it lit up exactly in the way that you recognize from a Michael Jackson video, the fact that the dialogues were really quirky. So it sort of set an ambience that made people already inclined to be playful with it. So I'm going to talk about another one. This one was a collaboration with the skate park, which is in Gateshead, northeast England as well, next to Newcastle. So that skate park is basically the biggest indoor skate park in the region. It's huge, it's a warehouse, they have like ramps, crazy things, also circus artists kind of training. And there's a lot of creativity going on in this building, but it's not something that you can see when you look at the building from the road when you pass in front of it. You just see a big warehouse. So we're a bit inspired by a Canadian artist whose name I can't remember right now. But anyway, she's an artist who plays a lot with CCTV cameras. And she did this piece where she was projecting the inside of a car dealership outside of the car dealership. So we're like, yeah, this is a really nice idea because of the fact that this projection sort of made the wall disappear. So we wanted to do something similar, but at the same time also play with the creativity of people inside the building on another level. So what we did is that we gave like GoPros to kids who were in the building, and we also asked them to record each other while they were doing tricks, whether be BMX or skateboards. And then outside of the building, we had events regularly where we would project on the building on a large scale what was going on inside. We also had drones that were filming people doing like all kinds of tricks from above. So we had to have a drone pilot because you need someone with a license to do that when it's indoors. And then the live stream from the drone, from the GoPros, and also recorded things that people had sent to us were mixed in real time with effects on the building. And we wanted to give it sort of a cinematic kind of feel. So sometimes things were like in slow motion, so you could see like sort of the elegance of the movements that people were doing. Sometimes we had like a bit of a crazy effect. So we played around with it a bit.
Wow. Sorry, I just haven't seen this one before. This is incredible. So again, loads of stuff in here, but the multi-layers, right? Everything from the kind of the technology working to the kind of the staging as it being cinematic, to the kind of the exposing of the building, to it being creating a playable space and becoming even more playable because you had this interaction. And the thing that I was just really noting was the fact that technologies you're using, like GoPros, etc., are things they're probably already using, right? Because I know skateboarding, a lot of it is about filming tricks and sharing, and so
yeah, exactly. A bit on that culture. Yeah.
And you're fitting in the practice of, skateboarding. It's a dangerous, difficult thing. but it fits into that, right? You didn't go along to them and go, right, we're going to have to make you record these pre-filmed things. We're going to use this particular technology that you're going to have to wear. It's going to be really difficult, right?
Yeah, no, it was like using very unintrusive kind of things. And also, I think it was probably the first project to use sort of indoors drone live footage and live remix of a video at the same time. So we actually collaborated with, we used certain software that was specific for projection mapping and live video editing. And we actually got a bit of consulting from the software developers because of the fact that it was quite innovative. So we had to sort of trick things around a bit. Yeah, tweak, not trick, tweak.
Was it Touch Designer? What did you use? Sorry, this is really geeky.
So we used a mixture of, I'm sorry, I have very bad memory. I need to remember what they're called. Modulate, which is a GarageCube software for live remix of video and audiovisuals. We used, well, obviously for the projection mapping to fit to the surface of the building, we used Mad Mapper, which is also from GarageCube. And then there was a bit of, the difficulty was streaming from the live filming inside into the laptop that was outside into all those software in real time using a very flimsy Wi-Fi. So there was a bit of tricks, a few tricks that we had to do using open source software for live broadcasting, and at the same time siphoning. Oh, right, yeah, we used a protocol called Siphon. That is a bit like OSC, Open Sound Control, but for video. So we were able to take video from one software to throw it into another software, to throw it into another software, and using another software from another company, which is actually, both of them actually local to Geneva. So they're all in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And one of the CEO of one of those companies is actually my mom's upstairs neighbors. So yeah, it's the whole story. But anyway, so this combination of software was quite innovative and complicated, but we managed it. Yeah.
Again, there's so many layers of that, isn't there? There's the use of the existing technologies, there's a use of people, existing practices, existing buildings, existing space. Again, we're not expecting our students to do this, right, in their first ever project or anything.
Well, it took months. It was really complicated.
And you're incredibly good at this. You know what I mean? You're international. That's why we've got you. But my point here is that it's this richness that we're looking for here, right? And that can be really simple interventions and really complex interventions. But the richness comes from a consideration of not just the wall, not just the people, not just the context. It's this mix of them, and that is to create that mix of those things and to research, and in your case, actually build the thing and run it, which is incredible. Cool. That's cool.
Thank you. So next project, this one, I don't have a good picture of it. This is actually like the prototype, but upside down. So, but well, the thing is that the piece was finished after I moved out of the UK, so I didn't get to take good pictures, but I'll get pictures when I go back. So this is, again, a project where it's a collaboration. The main artist is Zoe Gardner, and we also work with an interaction designer and artist called David Chatting. So Zoe Gardner is a glass artist based in Newcastle, who's really talented and does incredible things, and very sort of experimental as well. And what she wanted to do was she got a commission from a castle that was newly renovated in Sunderland called the Hilton Castle. It's like this whole, it's a castle, like an English castle, you know, with the kind of, you know, like some cartoons. But inside, so they had completely renovated it, and they wanted to have a huge installation inside the foyer that would be like a huge chandelier. And her idea was to do something that would be reminiscent on the rain, because it rains a lot in Sunderland. And basically, so she has like these really long tubes of glass that fall from the ceiling. And on top of this glass, there's speakers and LEDs. Like an array of LEDs that kind of reproduce the pattern of rain that's falling on a pavement when it's raining, you know, like the little droplets. So the difficulty here was to make something that would not be gimmicky, and they would combine sound, the sound of rain, and the light, of thunder, and also something that's replicating the patterns of rain falling on the road or sidewalk on the ground, and to do this giving a natural feel. So we each had like different things that we were focusing on. I was focusing on the sound. They was focusing more on the light. We were using videos for prototyping and tried all kinds of different things. And it was a very nice, like sort of iterative process where we tested something, we saw if it worked, and then we tested again, changed things, like a sort of it's iterative. And that's actually like a process I use a lot in my projects. So there are times where we just have like this idea and we're like, okay, let's do this, and then we do exactly that. But very often we start with an idea and then we test things and then things evolved. And it's a very good process to have an interaction design because it allows you to come closer to the core of the experience that you would like to realize for people. Because you can imagine that people would have a certain experience with what you propose to them, but it's by testing that you actually reach that experience, because then you get closer to it. Here's another project. This one is an art installation with sound and light and objects. So it was part of a European project called Corners, which was a huge Europe-wide EU-sponsored project where about 60 artists were commissioned to do explorations in different parts of Europe of how people lived, what were the things people worry about, what they care about, and then do like a touring kind of installation or performance that you would bring to different parts of Europe and engage people, local people, into what you're trying to have a conversation about. So I was in a group that was very interested in the concept of home. So not home just in terms of like the building that you live in, but also the feeling of home, the sense of home you get from surrounding yourself with things that are good for, that feel good for you. Also the feeling of the idea of feeling home somewhere in a country, or having to move to another country and build that new home there. How do you do that? The process of it. Also losing your home if you're a victim of domestic violence, or also we spent some time in Belfast, for instance, where you know how like the city is quite separated between different communities, and the sense of like being on one side of the street where you feel, okay, this is my side of the street, and then you cross and you're like, oh, this is sort of not my side of the street anymore. So sort of like immediately losing that sense of home and belonging. So like those different aspects, and also homelessness. And so we wanted to explore that by having a public space installation where we could engage with local people who would be just passing by. And the challenge there was that it's a project that would have to be moved, toured to different countries. And we also wanted the installation to have a sort of a personal, empathic kind of dimension, that people would learn someone else's story and relate to their own story. And you needed to adapt to different physical spaces, because every place we would bring it to would be a different place, obviously, because it's a different country. And it wouldn't be like in a white box gallery. It would be like in a park, in a train station, in a building. And also each place that we'll go to would have a different story. So for instance, we went to Kosovo, where a lot of the population had escaped from the war at some point. And so there the feeling of home was a certain thing. And so the thing I should have started with is that our decision was to use those bags that you can see on the picture, which are sort of like the immigrant bag kind of thing. So they're actually the most popular bags in the world. And originally they were designed by African immigrants in Paris who were wanted to do like a cheap version of the Tati bag. Tati is like a kind of a supermarket that sells clothes and kitchen things really cheaply. And they had like this handbag that was very, very specific to their brand, with the Vichy kind of patterns. And then a couple of neighborhoods away, the African immigrants did a similar kind of bag with a similar pattern, but that pattern actually became much more iconic than the Tati pattern. And it's it's the most sold bag in the world. And it's also the bag that people usually think is a local bag because you see it at the local markets. People travel with them because they're very lightweight and sturdy and waterproof. So they're associated a lot with the immigrants who go back to their countries and need to have like the lightest bag suitcase possible so that they can bring presents and then they can bring back food when they go home. But it's also a bag that, for instance, in Kosovo, people used when they were escaping to put all their belongings into, and they were all traveling, walking for days and days and weeks with those particular bags. And it's also the bag that people put their laundry in. So it really illustrates the notion of home from different perspectives. So we had about 300 of them in different colors. And in each place that we went to, we sort of did like a 3D kind of large scale sculpture with them. We were in Blythe, for example, in Northeast, where they became like a huge tower that was sort of overlooking the entire city. And we were also in Donostia or San Sebastian in the Basque Country in Spain, where we kind of drew on the ground a map of where homeless people in the city were staying. And then each of those spots were represented by like a pile of those bags. And also did that in Stockholm, Belfast, Gdansk in Poland, Blythe, Friesland in Kosovo, and I think that's it. I don't remember. But yeah, so we made those installations with those bags. And it's not just the bag, it's also that they would light up at night so that you could see them. And also in some of the bags, you had speakers that had recordings of interviews that we did with people where they were telling us what home means for them. So they would say, like, for me, home is family or it's refuge. So like all these kind of sort of narratives around the notions of home. And something I didn't say is that we often put those bags in places where people had to go through. So it's not like it wasn't an installation where people would go to intentionally. It was like in the passage of a train station. So there would be traffic anyway. And that's also an interesting thing because it would confront people with something that they didn't intentionally want to go to, but they just had to pass through because they needed to go from point A to point B. And because of that, they sort of had to confront those other people in the stories inside the bags. And we also had workshops, we had small performances. I was telling you, we were recording people's stories as well. So each city we went to, we recorded people and then we put those stories into the bags. And we also did a project with taxi drivers, but that's like a whole other story. So yeah, it was very different from one place to another because also people reacted to it differently. So for example, in Stockholm, when people would see those bags, they would think about Romanian immigrants because that's what Romanian immigrants use there. So then the discussions that were taking place around those bags between people and ourselves were very much centered on immigration, for instance. Whereas in Kosovo, it was the opposite. It was like the stories from the war, people escaping. In Belfast, it was about separation of communities. In Gdansk, it was about the old and the new town, the changes in society, how people were sort of trying to adapt. In Donostia, it was about homelessness and who is allowed to be in public space and who isn't, and these kind of things. So yeah, topic of home.
Just
it was a very big project that lasted a few years. So
just to jump in, our students, one of the things we're asking them to do is start with an artifact and kind of build this, these material, research the material cultures around those objects. I think this is like the best example I can think of, right? That bag has a lot of embodied meaning. That means it changes depending on context. It's part of an installation. It has material qualities that are useful in the things that you were trying to do, as well as the kind of the wider social cultural things that again shift depending where you are. Because one of the things that I think our students sometimes struggle with is they're starting with this object and they're like, oh, do I make just something out of this object? And like, no, think about the histories of it, think about how you might use this. The other thing was that it's a cheap plastic bag. The last one was like drones, GoPros, high-fluting sort of software. What I'm not saying is there is a different value in either, but what I'm saying is that you can use both, right? And still have incredible. It's such a such a clear thing from your work here. So I just wanted to point that out to our students.
Yeah, I mean, like using the latest technology is not an end in itself. What's important is what you do with it. So if you're able to use something that's new and innovative, cool. If you want to use something that's like super old school and using old material, cheap material, that's cool as well. The importance is the experience that you create for people. And also, I'd like to point out also that these are 300 plastic bags. So environmentally, we had to be really careful about how we were using them, how we would reuse them, dispose of them, and how we would fill them also so that they look fluffy. We always use recycled materials that we gathered locally and then we reused for other things. And so there's this whole aspect as well. This one is a different kind of public space. It's a museum. So the project is called Beyond the Borders, and it was a collaboration between lots of different cultural organizations. So there was mine, which was called Dataya Projects, which was specialized in interaction design, digital media arts. A lot of the projects I showed you are under that umbrella. But the main project leader on that project was called Dili Arts, which is an organization that works with prisoners in jail, basically, and makes creative projects with them, mostly theater-based. And we also work with an animation studio and a creative writer and a historian. And here the idea is that we worked in Hexham, again in the northeast of England, where they have the first purpose-built prison in the history of England. And this prison was used a lot to arrest and jail the local borders people, which were a population that lived between Scotland and England, that were the region where they lived was a bit of a no man's land that wasn't really under anyone's jurisdiction. I mean, it's a bit complicated. They were like the church had some jurisdiction, but not the crown. Anyway, they were a bit like pirates. And actually, when you look into it, their descendants then were later sent to Ireland to be punished for being pirates in that region of England / Scotland. Then were banned from having weapons and then emigrated to the US and were like, now we're having weapons again. And they're actually the borders are the ancestors of those people in the US who are like very obsessed with having the right to arms, and there's a whole story about it. But anyway, back to Northeast England. So a lot of the families that live in that region are still there. They still have the same patronyms. And we wanted to do something that would tell them a bit about their culture. And also it was a permanent installation in the prison that's become a museum now. So it's like a whole, as you would imagine, like a prison from 500 years ago, there was a dungeon where people would like live there 20 years among rats. It was really gruesome. So there's a lot of stories actually around those people. And there is also a few, now there's actual prisons that are in the region, in Durham and across, quite close to where the museum actually is. And what happened in that project is that the creative writer and the historian went into prisons and talked to local prisoners as part of their rehabilitation program. And together they wrote stories about people who lived there 500 years ago and how they got arrested and how their life in jail was. And so simultaneously relating to the history of the region, but also relating to the lived experience of the prisoners in the prisons, anyway. And based on that, the animation studio made stories that were using, this technique where you have like actors that have like those tags, and then you record the movements of the actors, and that's mapped into animated people. There's actually a whole documentary about Vercingétorix from the Gays in France that won a lot of awards a few years back that was using this technique. But this studio, Arca Studio, was one of the few that used that technique as well. And we used that in that. And our role was to transform this into a sort of an augmented reality experience. So if you take it from the other side, the idea is that when you're a visitor and you go into the museum and you see the typical museum exhibitions with mannequins and pictures and explaining the story of the museum and the prison, you would also have tablets that you can lift up, like on this picture, and then you would point that tablet at a family crest, like you have here in the middle of the image. And then you would see it as if it was sort of a window. So it's a live video stream. So you see the same thing on the screen as is actually in front of you. But then all of a sudden, elements from 500 years ago start appearing on the screen. So it's as if you're looking at a window through time, and you see the same room, but how it was back then. And then when those elements appear, then the characters that the prisoners and the historian and creative writer have developed start walking towards you and telling you their story. So it's sort of a way of communicating with the people from that time who appear on that screen as if you're looking through a window through time. So here the challenges were that it was a collaborative process, not just in terms of, an architect working with a designer, but it was like a theater company working with a historian, working with an animation studio, working with designers. So it was a lot of very disparate kind of professions that don't usually work together. So we had to find ways of, interacting and working together. And also, since this is a permanent exhibition in the museum, it had to be, we had to look into questions of ergonomics, sturdiness. Kids go there, kids damage stuff. So we had to do things that were really sturdy, and that were easy also for the museum staff to maintain, so that they wouldn't have to be like, oh my God, this is being switched off, what do I do now? So it had to be really simple. And we also decorated the tablets so that they would be with materials that were found very often in that time, like leather, kind of linen, and also using like visuals that would be reminiscent of that era and of that region as well, like local flowers that people would use for their medicine, these kind of things. Because it's for a museum, so.
So it's the tactile qualities as well are really important in this interaction. So yeah, using AR and high technology, but actually one of the really important things here is, how it feels, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Feel, and there is ways of considering that and designing for that. It's not just this subjective thing, which you can clearly see here. This process, again, just really important for our students.
Yeah. So within Ataya projects, I work with a designer called Anya Kovalyeva, who specialized in making jewelry and textile, and she was the one who did this whole sort of garmenting of the tablets. And this was my last slide. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. There is so much material in here, and what they're going to do is they're going to be watching this, and they're going to kind of discuss this in class. And getting case studies from different people who kind of create experiences for people, and this is just such a rich example that they can kind of return to. So just want to say thank you so much for all your help. What I'll do is I'll see if I can get some slides and resources that I can send out based on these and go and have a look. But what I would encourage everyone to do is watch this, have a look, think about what questions arise. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.